Welcome to the Williams residence at the Historic New Orleans Collection. This was the home of our founders, Leila and Kemper Williams, from 1946 to 64, and today it operates as a historic house museum. My name's Chris Cook. I'm a docent trainer. I work with the tour guides who bring the public through this house museum.
And I'm Lydia Blackmore, the Decorative Arts Curator, and I'm in charge of all of the objects and preservation of the house.
And together, we work to present all of the stories that can be told through our items, through the histories of the buildings, to the public who come on our historic house tours.
The Williams residence is furnished with all of the furnishings that the Williamses owned when they lived here in the mid-20th century, so there are a lot of objects to work with. My favorite object in the house is the coffee table here in the living room. It's actually two things pushed together to make one object. The top is a mid-19th century Victorian paper-mache breakfast tabletop. As paper-mache made out of paper pushed together to create a solid surface. This is the most Victorian thing you can find, with Queen Victoria in the center surrounded by all of her castles in inlaid mother of pearl. The base of the table is actually an inverted column capital taken from a home here in New Orleans. So 19th century architecture with 19th century antiques combined together to create a 20th century piece, a coffee table.
Which is a perfect example of the challenges that face our tour guides when they're preparing to give guided tours. There's a lot to talk about. We can talk about Victorian design, we can talk about the adaptations of the interior decorators that worked with the Williamses in creating new pieces of furniture for them. We can talk about the importation of English antiques to New Orleans. And so there's a lot of base knowledge that we work with our guides to build up over the course of their training. And it's actually one of the things that makes it really fun to be a guide. And then talking about the Williams themselves and how they entertained, if we were guests of the Williams, moving from the drawing room towards the dining room, we could be guests for dinner, having just finished our cocktails and going to eat. When we get to the dining room, of course, we talk about how the Williamses entertained.
Yes, but the dining room is the only room not open on the tours. You get to stand there and look in. I, as the Curator of Decorative Arts, get to come in because I change the setting on the table about twice a year and come in here for maintenance.
And yeah, and for the purposes of our tours, we get the information from the curator, Lydia, who gives us details on all the items in the rooms and how they change. And in addition to that, our docents and tour guides do additional research, looking for photographs of the Williams entertaining so we can tell stories that are rich with details, such as the fact that you dressed for dinner when you came to dinner with the Williamses. There was black tie for the men. It was a pretty formal setting here in the heart of the French Quarter. Candlelit dinner, and the Williamses entertained pretty frequently. It's nearly every night of the week while they were in town.
This summer setting is based on a French theme with French porcelain plates and Baccarat crystal, but we have a choice of about a dozen china patterns to change the table with, and Leila had even more when she was setting her dining table. Setting the table requires a coordination of many pieces. You have to pick your linens, and Leila had everything monogrammed with her monogram. You have to pick your flatware and the proper flatware for the course that you're setting it for. Leila has a set of over 300 matched pieces in this king's pattern flatware. The plates on the table today are French porcelain plates that go with the French Baccarat crystal, fruit bowls, and drinking glasses. And the table setting's not complete until the cigarettes are put on the table, with the cigarettes on display in a small glass and a matchbook next to it on a crystal ashtray.
And the kitchen here is a lot of our guests' favorite room on the tour. It's really relatable. It's a really nice kitchen that a lot of people like. And it's interesting to talk about because this is a state-of-the-art kitchen for 1948.
And what makes this kitchen so modern is the Williams' original appliances, like this Roper Town & Country range with 8 burners, a griddle, and several ovens and broilers. This is one of the first ovens you can set the temperature and a timer. So they provide a handy chart inside every door, so you know how long to cook things. We also have the Williams' original Frigidaire Imperial Cyclomatic French door refrigerator.
Which we don't get to open on tours.
Oh, but I do. You can see inside of the avocado green interior, the ice box, and the butter and cheese containers.
When we're training our tour guides, we think of all these things that are in the house as being potential jumping off points to talk about different things. And these maps are a perfect example because these maps were of the type that Mrs. Williams gave to Mr. Williams. It sparked his interest in collecting maps, and that was followed by interest in collecting historical manuscripts. And we have kind of the story of the beginning of the historic New Orleans collection in these maps. But we're not just limited to what we have on the walls that we can talk about, because we also tell the stories of how these houses were lived in over time and how people renovated to make the homes work for them. For instance, where we're standing right now, this stairwell was originally an exterior stairwell, but the Williams added central air in the late 1940s. So this stairwell was brought into the house and they added a ceiling over it. You know, and speaking of how the house was renovated over time, the house gives us more clues, like these two fireplaces that tell us that in the original 1889 configuration, this one big room was two separate bedrooms.
And I love how they turned this one big room into a comfortable space in mid-century design, combining antique forms with 20th century forms and bright, bold 1950s patterns. Like the 20th century radio and record player here next to the General's green chair. They enjoyed sitting here in the evenings and listening to records, and we have all of their music records of opera and classical music. And sometimes they would pull their TV out, which they kept in a closet, and watch their favorite show, Bonanza.
Well, one of the things that's interesting for our tour guides is that sometimes the tours can feel quite intimate, which it certainly does in this small space. It's a very personal space for Mrs. Williams. This was Mrs. Williams' refuge from migraines. It's set back from the street. We're in the center of the house. The walls are upholstered so that it's quiet. This is usually a pretty dim room. And there's an air conditioning vent you see that points right down onto the couch. So it's cool, quiet, and dark. It's the perfect place if you have to suffer from a migraine.
It's also the perfect place to have a smoke, which Leela liked to do. And when we turned into a museum, we had to reupholster all of the fabric in this room because of the cigarette smoke in every thread. This room was originally designed to be Leela's dressing room, and so we have the custom Cypress hat closets with some of her hats on display. All of these hats are from Bergdorf Goodman. We know that that was her favorite store because we have all of her receipts in the archives.
As we continue through Mrs. Williams' wing of the property, we enter her private suite here. And it's a really nice room. We see we have these big double-hung windows, and the room is filled with some of the treasures that they collected on their own personal journeys, like a dowry chest from Mexico and the embroideries on the walls. So we've seen Mrs. Williams' kind of wing of the house. Now we're on Mr. Williams' turf. This is the general study, and it looks very much like you'd expect a study to look. We have this great wood paneling, which makes sense because of the cypress industry that the Williams were involved in. But the treatment here is pretty unusual. We call this pickled cypress. It's different than the standard treatment of cypress you see in South Louisiana with a dark stain and a high gloss finish. This is a light blue wash that's rubbed off and is left with a matte finish. And while it's unusual for what we usually see cypress, it's very much keeping with the mid-20th century design. And it also works for this room. We're in a corner of the courtyard here, so if we had dark stained cypress in this room, this would be a dark room.
Yes, and this is very much a 1950s gentleman's study. And this is a portrait of the general before he was a general. This is actually done right after he returned from World War I. Who wouldn't like a wall of bookcases like this? The books that we have on display here are duplicates from our research library because the original books that the general had were the first books of the Historic New Orleans Collection Research Library, and so they're over on Charter Street at the Williams Research Center. We've interspersed the books with pieces collected by the Williamses, picked up on their travels, and of course the Comus Cup from when General Williams participated in that Mardi Gras organization.
So Lydia provides a lot of the research for specific items and their histories and how they came into the house. It's up to our docent tour guides to figure out how to make connections. And to do that, you need a pretty wide knowledge base, and it's something that we're always working on, being the history of the lumber industry of Louisiana, the history of shipping, how different things going on in this neighborhood during the time that the Williams lived here impacted the Williams and the way they renovated. So there's always a lot for us to talk about.